So we're going to be going through Amendment 4 first, and then we're going to go through Amendment 5. There'll be a panel, and we have Grover Norquist as a special guest that's going to kind of kick us off with Amendment 5, but we'll start with Amendment 4. So to kick off tonight, we have our MC of the evening. We have News Talk STL's Tim Jones and Chris Arp Show. Tim Jones. Good. All right, Tim Jones, everybody.
I want to thank the Missouri and St. Louis Young Republicans for all their support over the years, not on just this effort, but on so many efforts that we have worked on together. Because at one time I was a young Republican, and my wife says I still act like one. But it has been great working with Frank and with so many of the other young Republicans in the room. I hope you all have been encouraged by all the activity. No matter what happens next week, I want to thank you for being involved in the process. And I hope you don't quit. Next week, and I can say this about any election, no election is the end of anything. Often it's the beginning of the next phase. So no matter what happens next week on all of these issues, on all of these candidate races, on all of these battles, one of the most important things that I believe we need to do as I am a Republican, I'm a former Republican legislator and speaker and majority leader, is that as far as the Republicans go, no matter what happens next week, we need to make sure that we have an opportunity to circle the wagons and not circle up the firing squad, and all work together on some other huge important issues. We'll probably be back in this very room talking about some of them over the next few months, because there's also some very critical races, decisions, and issues that will be decided in Missouri in November. Even though many of our candidate races might be decided in August because of the demographics of Missouri, not all of them will be. There will be some important general election races, and there will be several important ballot issues on the ballot in November as well. So we're kind of maybe approaching halftime, and so for all of you who are tired, get some rest on August the 5th, and then we're going to be back at it on August the 6th. We're going to have a two-part meeting tonight, and for those of you who have been following the Amendment 5 battle, crusade, discussion, debate, we're going to have what has been known as one of our quintessential forums on Amendment 5. And this is probably, there are several more town halls that are going to be held the rest of this week in other parts of the state, and there's at least 1 to 2 more smaller events that will occur in St. Louis. But this is probably going to be our last event of this magnitude with this many folks here. And there's some folks that have traveled from all over the state that have been working on Amendment 5 all summer long. And so I'll recognize them when we get to that part. But we've got a little appetizer for you that we have added on tonight, and that is Amendment 4. And many would argue, despite how important tax policy is, and it truly is, Amendment 4 is more of a historic decision that Missourians will make as to how we're going to have our state governed. Are we going to be governed by a constitutional republic, or are we going to continue to kind of whipsaw back and forth between that constitutional republic and those representatives and senators and what I feel, honestly, is something the founders abhorred, and that's mob democracy based upon whatever the fad of the day might be, which shifts with the winds in public opinion, especially when you're talking about your sacred document, your Constitution. Statutes can be debated and revised and added to, deleted, reversed, put back into process by citizens or by the legislature every year. Amendment 4 does not touch the statutory process. I'm not going to get much more deeper into it because we have a great speaker here tonight who is going to discuss that. I want to talk a little bit about Byron for a second, if you'll give me the pleasure. So Byron, you and I have known each other more than we want to admit, right? 20 years maybe?
Yeah, going on.
About 20 years. Byron Keelan is going to speak with us tonight about Amendment 4 first. I've known Byron in many different ways. He's worn many different hats over the years, like I have as well. And he most recently founded something that we needed in this state. And in fact, Byron is one of 2 guys. I'll get to the second guy when we get to Amendment 5. But there's 2 gentlemen who have done incredible work over the last several years in Missouri on the public policy level. You know, I would argue completely divorced from politics, although public policy often makes good politics and vice versa. But we had a bit of a gap. We had some organizations years ago. Sometimes organizations run their course and people go on and do other things, and so there was a void. And as I've been saying a lot recently because of some other instances that have happened in our state, nature abhors a vacuum. And I was so glad that Dennis Ganal of Mo Tax Relief Now, who I'll speak about for the next part of our discussion, and Byron Keelan of Freedom Principle Missouri rose to that necessary challenge. Byron set up a great organization called Freedom Principle of Missouri, and he has run it like a true grassroots organization, literally founded out of nothing, and he's built it up into an organization that has statewide impact, statewide influence, and members from all across the state of Missouri as well. Byron and his group, and Byron used to run an international organization, so Byron knows all about boards and bylaws and how to run a meeting and things of that sort. And so he's taken the concept of Freedom Principle and he's taken it very seriously. And the results of that has been, several years later now, being a very respected public policy organization that is working at the state capitol every single week, every single year during session, and then working with legislators and candidates all across the state of Missouri, whether we're in session or not. It has been a dream of his, and it's so nice, it's so wonderful to see when people pursue their dreams and make them reality. Byron has become an expert on Amendment 4. He has been traveling the state discussing it. He will speak to any two people gathered in their midst who want to hear about Amendment 4. He's spoken to small groups, large groups, every group in between. He's done tons of radio interviews on my station, News Talk STL. Hope you've all downloaded the app by now. I've talked about it all summer. And such and so forth. Amendment 4 did struggle a little bit to have a robust campaign as far as money. It's got a lot of great people working on it. They've done a lot of great messaging. So Byron took it upon himself to start his own campaign for Amendment 4, and he might talk about that as well. And he might have an ask here in the last week or so. I don't know. I don't know if you can spend any more money at this point or not. So without further ado, please welcome Byron Keelan of Freedom Principle, Missouri.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to speak with you guys tonight. And the reason why I really appreciate this opportunity here is that we've got to protect our Constitution, and it's interesting. You know, John Locke, who is the philosopher behind the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, taught that the legitimate government rests on the consent of the governed. But it was exercised through a representative legislature, not raw majorities. And that principle has shaped our republic and remains vital to protecting our liberty. And under the Missouri process right now, we face the greatest election integrity issue of our time. And the fact is that we elect every 2 years representatives and senators to represent us in Jefferson City, yet we have special interest groups or progressives that bypass the legislature and do an end around and embed their special interest carve-outs into our Constitution. When you think about it, our Constitution has been treated worse than a dog in a Dr. Fauci test lab. And that's where we are right now. Our Constitution is for sale to the highest bidder. When you think about gambling, think about marijuana, think about abortion, think about sports betting, these things are not constitutional rights. They're statutes that need to be delegated and deliberated through the legislative process, not bypassed and go to an angry mob in St. Louis City and Kansas City, which is what's happening here. And so, you know, we think that we are a representative republic, but we really are mob rule. And so we have to make our Constitution great again when we think about it here. And we have a problem with the citizen initiative petition process because you don't even have to be a Missouri resident to even file a citizen initiative petition. So we really shouldn't even be calling it a citizen initiative petition. It should be called a special interest initiative petition because that's who's doing it. Corporations who get sick and tired of the legislature deliberating is that, well, you know, why should we go through that process, hire all these expensive lobbyists when we can go out, pay, you know, spend that $5 million, get it on the ballot, and then we can go and lie about things. I mean, let's face it, who really believed that sports betting was going to generate money for education? You know, the fact is that when you don't read those things, you didn't realize that they got to deduct their lobbying expenses, their legal expenses, their marketing expenses, their overhead expenses. There is no money for education. And the teachers' unions buy this stuff. And so we have to think about our initiative petition process because it's been under attack. When the legislature was debating this issue last year, I went through the Secretary of State's website. And over the last 23 years, so he has all the citizen initiative petitions that's been filed since 2002. So over the last 23 years, we've had 313 citizen initiative petitions filed with the Secretary of State's office. 232 of them have been for constitutional amendments. 74% of citizen initiative petitions have been to amend our Constitution. We can't withstand that kind of tyranny. This is really what it is. It's tyranny. And when you think about it, the Democrats or the special interest groups, they have put out 180 of these petitions, and they've had 23 approved for the ballot. And they've had 14 of those get approved. So they actually have a 60% success rate. And what really bothers me is that we have conservatives on our side who sit there and say, well, we need to protect the citizen initiative petition process. And I ask why. They've tried 54 times to get an initiative petition on the ballot, and zero have even made it to the ballot. Things that we hold dear, that are potentially constitutional rights, such as personhood, pro-life issues, school choice, universal school choice, hand counting of ballots, paper ballots, even photo ID. Those things we've tried to get into the Constitution through the initiative petition process. The last conservative initiative petition to be successfully passed was the Hancock Amendment 46 years ago. So we're advocating for a process that we can't win because we don't have the money. We don't have the foreign billionaires like George Soros and Hans-Georg Weiss coming in and dropping $10 or $20 million to pay some purple-haired person from California who doesn't care what goes into our Constitution and doesn't even know what they're actually collecting signatures for. That's the process here. That's the problem, I should say. So what does Amendment 4 accomplish? Well, it's going to ban that foreign funding. We can't stop out-of-state money because it's unconstitutional, but we can stop these global organizations from giving money to third-party charities and then they funneling money to local entities. And that's what's happening here. We need to ensure statewide approval when it comes to approving our Constitution. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a second. We also need to criminalize signature fraud. If we're going to have these people from California come in and collect signatures, and they're going to lie about what the initiative petition is, or they're going to falsify signatures on this, then by God, they ought to be held accountable for that. And then we're going to require public hearings. Do you know that there are no public hearings for citizen initiative petitions? So you don't even know what's on the ballot. And all you ever see that is on the ballot is the 100 words that they actually dictate what goes on the ballot. So they even leave half of that stuff off. I mean, how many people realized when if you voted for Amendment 3, that you were voting to allow transgender surgeries for minors? How many people thought that knew that they were voting to remove parental consent for minors? I guarantee you nobody that perhaps supported the exceptions thought that they were voting for this stuff. And that's the thing, they're hiding this. And then we need to require full text of the initiative petitions when they're given out to the voters. And the reason I say that, I'm going to show this to you. This section right here is the marijuana section. 42 pages that was added to the Constitution. There are more words in those 42 pages than in the entire U.S. Constitution, including the 27 amendments. It's ridiculous. And that's the thing. We have embedded DEI into our Constitution. because we didn't, it's 36 pages the way they printed it out. But if someone hands you 36 pages of documents when you get your ballot, are you really going to vote for that thing? Are you really going to sit there and read it? Perhaps not. I mean, it might be, but it's going to force you to be an informed voter so that you know what's going into the Constitution. And so when you think about, again, the foreign funding, Soros, Proposition A, the minimum wage increase that passed in 2024, raised $4 million. George Soros' open source fund gave half of it, $2 million. You think about the 1630 fund. That's the fund of Hans-Borg Weiss, who's out of Sweden. He gave like $36 million, $10 million of that came to Missouri. And we only lost by a fraction on Amendment 3. So think about it. Had that $10 million not come to Missouri, we probably wouldn't be dealing with what we're dealing with. And when you think about ensuring broad support for constitutional amendments, think about this. This is the map of the 2024 Amendment 3. 8 out of 114 counties and City of St. Louis approved Amendment 3. They forced the abortion, the transgender surgeries, the lack of parental consent, and removed all health safety standards for women by 12% of the population dictating what goes into our Constitution. This is absurd. And so we have to ensure broad support by getting all 8 congressional districts in here to have an equal say. We have to make sure that everybody's voice is being represented when it comes to constitutional amendments. And when you think about it here, and Ben Keithley, who's going to be up here earlier, talked about this. If 1 out of 8 congressional districts is opposing something, you have to ask yourself, what is that impact to that one district? And think about St. Louis County and St. Louis City with the merger. Do you think that do we really want Kansas City, Springfield, Cape Girardeau, and up north to dictate what goes into our Constitution that forces St. Louis City and St. Louis County to merger? No, we don't want to do that. So we don't want to force our beliefs on our views on other parts of the state. And the other reason why that we have to, we talk about the two standards also. And I want to address this because I think it's a real thing. When citizen initiative petition, a billionaire only needs to win 1 election. There's no vetting. All they get to do is they get to submit the process to the Secretary of State, State Auditor, and the Attorney General. They're not looking for constitutionality. They're looking to make sure all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and all the formatting is in bold and all that stuff. They're not looking at whether or not it's violating someone's rights or whether or not it's even really single subject, for that matter. But when you look at a legislative process here, it has to, before it even gets filed as a bill, it has to go through legal review. And then when it gets filed and goes to a committee, it has to be heard by the public. The public gets to hear it twice, once on the House and once on the Senate side. And then it's debated big time on the House side and then the Senate side. And a lot of times on the Senate side, it potentially dies. But if it does get through, then you have to get a vote of the majority. So our legislature really is a concurrent majority. We elect them to represent us, and they then speak from a statewide perspective on what goes on to the ballot. And as Bishop has said, a citizen initiative petition only has to win 1 election. A legislative IP has to win 101. They have to win 82 in the House, 18 in the Senate, and 1 general election. And before you can even bring a legislative IP, you actually have to run for office and get elected. So you have that extra hurdle. But we talk about this because there's a group called Respect Mo Voters that's coming with a potential petition here in November. And they want to embed direct democracy into or I should say mob rule, into our Constitution. That if they pass something by citizen initiative petition, the legislature can't amend it unless they get 80% of the vote of each house. They also want the courts to be able to rewrite ballot language if they don't like it. And then they don't even want you to be able to challenge it in court if it's been approved by the voters. So they're taking away the ability to even determine whether or not something's constitutional in there. This is the Democratic social agenda coming to Missouri, and we have to stop it. The wolves are at our front door, and if we don't pass this, our front door is wide open. And it'll be a while before, this legislature can change it. So we've been doing radio ads on 3 radio stations here in St. Louis and 1 station in Kansas City. We've been running digital billboard ads all across the state. And if you want, we still have a little bit of time to do a couple of texting campaigns. So if you want to go to freedomprincipalmo.org and donate to the PAC and help us do this, if we can raise about $10,000 before Friday here, which is only a couple days, but we can actually do a couple of texting campaigns and try to get out the vote on August 5th. And I encourage you, you've got literature on your chairs there. Please take it with you, share it with your friends, share it with your churches, encourage them to support this amendment, because the big thing here is that Amendment 3 is going to be on the November ballot. If Amendment 3 passes and Amendment 4 fails, we'll be right back in the same situation we are dealing with this anti-abortion group, and they're going to come back with twice as much money and twice as much power, and we're going to have to try to fight this again. And I don't really know if we can continue to fight these types of things. So we really have to buckle down and get our Constitution and protect it. So I appreciate it, and I can answer any questions, or I can, yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, what I'm saying is some conservatives are saying they're against 4. By the way,
Thank you.
But some conservatives are saying, no, one little district can derail the whole thing. And somehow they got it all twisted in their minds that actually this was already happening, and that's what we're trying to fix, because of, if you think about like the special interests in the city. Can you address that? Where did that come from, and how do you counter that?
Well, the issue here is that they're focusing on the fact is that in case they want to do an initiative petition, is that they think, well, St. Louis City or Kansas City can stop it. Well, the problem is that it would be okay, and that's good logic, if we actually were getting things on the ballot. But we're not even getting things on the ballot. And so it doesn't do us any good to worry about something that we don't use or don't have the ability to use in a effective manner. And so and the simple fact is that probably if the Republicans or conservatives propose a constitutional amendment, to me, I think it actually is something that is constitutional worthy, and therefore you make your case, and if it's protecting the Second Amendment, protecting life, those types of things, I actually think you would get 8 of 8 districts in. So the issue here is that you have to be able to sell your idea, but the fact is that in order to do that, you have to even raise $5 to $10 million just to get it on the ballot. So I would rather make sure that we keep a Republican supermajority. I think we need to elect more conservatives to that, which is why we have the Missouri 82 Alliance program that for the Freedom Principles doing, to elect more conservatives to the House of Representatives. And if we need to fix the Constitution, then let's fix it. But let's prevent this mob rule from wrecking it, so that we have Medicaid expansion that was approved back in 2020 that did not have any funding mechanism to it. It was unconstitutional in that. But the court said, go ahead. So senior citizens, disabled, and the blind are being kicked off Medicare, while lazy people who are eligible and can work are being allowed to get on it. There's $600 million in Medicaid savings that we talk about if we can reform this. And we can't do it because we have to go back to a vote of the people. And so we talk about, oh, we need to get our budget under control. Well, we have $600 million sitting out there that we can't fix because of the citizen initiative petition process. And so to me, that's the greater issue. I'd rather stop the wolves at the door than worry about, trying to do something that we've never been able to. It's bird in the hand versus two in the bush. So.
Frank, if you could come up and maybe Camelia too, and we're going to kind of reset the stage up here. I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes while they do that. We're going to move to our Amendment 5 discussion. If anybody thinks of any other questions on Amendment 4, we can have them brought up at the end. We will do Q&A after our traditional Amendment 5 discussion here. Okay, all right. My name is Tim Jones, by the way. I really didn't introduce myself properly earlier. So I am a former Missouri legislator. I was very proud to serve all of you who were here in Missouri back in the day as your majority leader and Speaker of the House. A little bit of an auspicious anniversary this coming month. 20 years ago, in August, I was elected to the Missouri House, much to my wife's chagrin. So thank you. Thank you for that. I have one fan. That's nice. I got one. Yep. I termed out in 2015, and definitely to the chagrin of many people that I used to argue with, I didn't go away. Us speakers just tend to stick around and kick around. I've had a fascinating career over the last 12 years. Long story short, I am in media, radio, and I also run my own state government affairs practice. I work with many of the groups that you've heard from and will hear from tonight. Very blessed in my career. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of long days. But when you love doing what you're doing, it hardly feels like a job. So I feel myself very blessed to work with some incredible people on some incredible, amazing issues. One last thing I want to say about Amendment 4. If there needs to be something added to the Constitution, which is supposed to be a simple, sacrosanct document, right? Many of you probably have, some of you I know, have a copy of the U.S. Constitution with you right now, and it's probably inside your pocket, because that's how beautifully simple it was, and is, and still is. The Missouri Constitution, you need a wagon to pull it around at this point. But if there is something that critically important that needs to go into our Constitution, Amendment 5 does not change the process by which our constitutional republic operates here in the state of Missouri. If you have something that you feel is critical for the Constitution, then you do what you do on any other statutory matter. You petition your government to put that in the Constitution. Your state representative, your senator, and you ask them to put that through the legislative referral process, and it will pass if it's approved by the same 50% plus one standard. What Byron is talking about is stopping the outside influence from corrupting our Constitution, as they have successfully done over the last 20 years, starting in 2006 with embryonic stem cell research and ending with abortion and transgender mutilation surgeries on demand in 2024. We've had massive welfare expansion. We almost had a massive redistricting heist under the auspices of something called Clean Missouri. These things are never termed what they actually do when they come for the initiative process. So that's what we're trying to change. All right. I also, I'm on a station here in town. We started 5 years ago, News Talk STL, and I hope you found that station and listened to it. I'm also, though, this is so important. These two battles, Amendment 4 and 5, they're so important that I want to give some attention to one of my former colleagues at a different station I was at. He's still an incredibly good friend, and I have heard him talk about 4 and 5, and he has done it in a magnificent manner. And that's how important this is, that we're all working so well together. I want to give a big shout out to Mark Cox right here from 97.1. Mark has hit the nail on the head on Amendment 4 and 5. So you'll just have to listen to both of us. We both podcast everything, so it's not that hard. So thank you, Mark, for being here tonight. I know he's a big fan of some of the folks that are going to be presenting here as well, and he's interviewed many of them too. And finally, as far as personal introductions, I do want to thank my wife is like having PTSD flashbacks this summer, because this is like what we used to do back in the day as I was running 110 races all across the state and never ever home. But it's been a wild summer indeed, and has brought back a lot of memories. I want to thank my wife, Suzanne, and my daughter, Abby, who happened to be here tonight in the back of the room. Usually they avoid these things like the plague, but daughter Abby may be following in Dad's footsteps. She was accepted into Girl State this summer. She had a great experience, and she said, "Dad, you're working on all this stuff. Is there anything I can come to and see what's actually going on in real life?" And I said, "Yeah, you can come to an Amendment 5 town hall. It's a blast, you know." So I want to thank her for being here. All right, let's bring up all of our speakers. We've got some incredible folks here for you to hear tonight. I've heard this presentation a million times this summer. Some of you may have as well, but I always learn something because, in my opinion, we have some of the best minds, not only in tax and fiscal policy, but in the public policy world, not only in this state, but across the country as well. So we are joined here tonight by Grover Norquist, the founder and the president of Americans for Tax Reform. Give Grover a big hand. And we also have two of the state affairs directors. We have the fellow who leads the state affairs, the state government affairs group at Americans for Tax Reform, and that is my very good friend Ben Rajadurai, who's in the back. Ben. And one of his men, these guys have been to Missouri more times than they can remember. Dennis Hull is here from ATR as well. ATR is interested in any state that is looking at modernizing, updating its tax system, and especially eliminating its income tax. Grover's going to talk about that in just a moment. We also have what I would refer to as the A-team on Amendment 5. First of all, we have the fellow whose fault this all is. He's been working on this for years, tinkering away in his workshop, and the culmination of. So I say that because Representative Bishop Davidson did not come to this lightly. This is something that the representative has worked on maybe since before he entered the legislature. He is one of the true deep thinkers. He is one of the calmest people I've ever met. He's the opposite of me. And he knows Amendment 5. It was called HJR 173 during the session. He knows it inside and out, frontwards and backwards. He had the whole thing memorized months ago. And he's able to explain it in a really, he's able to take something that's a complex policy and explain it such that every time I've been in a room with him, if there were skeptics there, they walk out pretty much completely flipped around and thinking the other way. Representative Bishop Davidson from Southwest Missouri.
Thank you. Very nice.
From right here in our backyard, representing basically what I call Greater Chesterfield, is Representative Ben Keithley. And Ben Keithley has never met a tax he didn't want to eradicate. And you know, a lot of times in today's world, we hear the phrases, "Oh, you legislators, what are you going to do? Send another tersely worded letter? You know, you're going to have another committee hearing. You're going to give another speech. You're going to put something on social media." Ben Keithley is one of the most accomplished legislators, and he's just getting started. Who has actually gotten good stuff passed all the way through the system, and sometimes more importantly, he stopped bad stuff from going into law, or he has removed bad stuff that's already been in the law. He also is a new father, third time over. He's got a little 3-month-old guy at home, and so there's probably better places he'd rather be tonight, but he's with you fine folks instead. Representative Ben Keithley, give him a big hand. And finally, I mentioned earlier, I can go over to my podium now. I mentioned earlier Dennis Ganal, and Dennis is the other fellow I mentioned earlier who was involved in public policy back during that time when I was in office. And he reminds me of that often. And I sort of remember those days, but it was all kind of a blur. Dennis says he remembers me. Hopefully it's a good memory. And Dennis has been involved in public policy for decades. He has studied complex issues. He focuses on tax and fiscal policy, but he's gotten into so many different areas. He is an accomplished author. He is a great communicator. I think he used to run some newspapers too. Yeah. He's a renaissance man, in today's world. He refired up the engines of Mo Tax Relief Now several years ago. And even though I told him to slow down and these things take time, And he was so chomping at the bit that he's one of the few people I know that was able to pass a bill in 1 year, the senior citizen property tax freeze a couple years ago. And now he's been working on Amendment 5. Give Dennis a big hand.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And finally, before we get started, I want to thank Americans for Prosperity for helping host yet another event. Camellia, this is the 100th and something odd event this summer. Camellia is the legislative director for AFP, and she's very much, she defines happy warrior, and she's one of those people that doesn't ever expect any accolades, but you deserve them for all the great work you've done this summer. Thank you, Camellia. All right, you're all tired of clapping, but one last time. I've got some great people in the room who have worked. I met some of them. I've seen them on the little Hollywood Squares things all summer long on Zoom and team meetings. But I have worked for the Amendment 5 campaign, for the Missouri Promise campaign, and I was put in charge of basically the boots on the ground effort. And I assembled a team. It was supposed to originally only be 8 or 9 people. I think it turned into about 20. And I was able to pick some of the best and brightest folks from around the state. Some of them I already knew, and they're already in politics and public policy. Some came highly recommended. They have all done incredibly generous work. So I have a big chunk of my team of regional directors here, some of who have traveled great distances to be here. If you guys and ladies, if you'd all just maybe stand up for a second, wave your hand. Thank you very much. These are some incredibly bright folks. We've got on this team, I've got PhDs and aspiring PhDs. I have military veterans and some who are still on reserve duty. I have folks who work in the Capitol already as chiefs of staffs and legislative assistants and former chiefs of staff. So for those of you who are I am getting a little older now. I know there's some folks, maybe my senior in the room. For those of you who are always worried about the younger generation, we've got some incredibly bright young people in Missouri that are following up behind us, so we can be very proud of them. All right, let's get to our program. First, we're going to kick off with the 35,000 foot, and that's what this, I love that we have a screen tonight.
Yeah.
We have a handout, and you can take this home with you. Grover will sign it for you if you ask him nicely. This is the map, and this is one of the 2 major things that are highlights tonight. HCR does a lot of work. They're a national in scope organization that Grover founded many decades ago. One of the things we'll talk about at the end is the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which we are inviting all current incumbents and candidates to sign. We'll get to that later. The other is the map, and Grover's going to, I know, focus on this in the beginning. And that's why we're here, because you don't just have a constitutional amendment unless there is a problem that needs to be addressed and solved. So I'm going to turn it over to Grover Norquist, founder and president of Americans for Tax Reform. He's going to give us the 35,000 foot of where the states are as far as tax policy and where Missouri needs to go.
Absolutely. Tim, thank you very much. On the other side of this map is the chart that explains the power of the tax issue. The top half is who runs the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. The bottom half is who runs the top is the Senate, bottom is the U.S. House. And our friends, the little skinny thing in the middle is who's the president, because frankly, that only matters a little bit. Congress raises taxes. Congress cuts taxes. Congress passes the laws. Presidents can slow things down by vetoing them, but they can't make anything happen. And so as you see here, for 62 years, from 1932 until the yellow line, 1994, 62 years, Republicans won the House and the Senate twice in 62 years. And as soon as Eisenhower went away, whatever he vetoed, they could pass. When Nixon moved on, they could pass what they wanted. We had a one-party state for 62 years because the Republican Party might raise your taxes. On that yellow line is when almost 96% of Republicans in Congress, House, Senate, and running signed the pledge never to raise taxes and have kept it since. Since the Republicans became the party that would not raise your taxes. They may invade small countries you can't pronounce, but they will not raise your taxes. And that is the 18 years that Republicans have won the House and the Senate, and 6 years the Democrats did. So 3-1. The world changed, and the Republicans, not dominant, but 3-1 is winning more often than not and controlling Congress 3 times as often as the Democrats. That's the power of the tax issue. That's at the federal level. We have 50 states, or 57, and in those, we now have, there were 6 states that had no income tax. In the last few years, Tennessee and New Hampshire, they had taxes on dividends and interest, not on wages, and they would run around going, we have no income tax. You have an income tax. It's just on dividends and interest and not wages. They fixed that. So now there are 8 states with no income tax. The yellow states have a single rate, and there are now 16 states with a single rate. Used to be, 5 years ago, there were only 8. We have doubled the number of states that went to a single rate tax. The reason that's important is advertised by Illinois. Illinois is full of Bolsheviks, 2/3, both houses. It's out of Chicago. Al Capone was one of them. Were cheerful people over there. And you would think they would look like California, New York, Minnesota with an income tax over 10%. They're under 5%. Why would a completely left-wing Democrat legislature or governor only be taxing at under 5%? Because they have a constitutional amendment that requires a single rate tax. So if they want to raise taxes, they have to look everybody in the eye and say, oh, I've got a great idea, okay, and you're all paying for it. And then they go, it's not that great. If you had told me only 2% were paying for it, that might have been a great idea, but not if we're all paying for it. They can't raise taxes in Illinois, income taxes, because they have other taxes they work on. But the income tax, as long as it's single rate, they haven't been able to move it up. So Karl Marx knew this, and if you've probably been rereading your Communist Manifesto recently, he has a list of 10 things that every good communist dictatorship should have. Number 2, a graduated income tax, also at the same time called a progressive income tax. Now 8 states in the last several years have said, we had a graduated income tax, we're going to flat. So we now have 16 flat. And states that go to flat are now also looking to move to 0. And this is where Missouri is entering into a conversation, joining a race that a number of other states have been in. Right now, 5 states have passed laws that say we will be triggering down as revenue comes in above a spending limit. We will take the income tax down until it gets to 0. So those ones with the black lines on them, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Kentucky, West Virginia, South Carolina, 5 states, they are on the way to 0. If the legislature took a nap that lasted a number of years, they don't need to vote on anything. It automatically clicks down. So they're committed to going to 0. And there are another 7 states where the Republican leadership, and Missouri is one of those, where the Republican leadership says, we're going to 0, and begun to take serious steps like this, a measure on the ballot, to get there. So what Missouri is doing, well, isn't this radical? Isn't this weird? Isn't this too different for words? Matter of fact, Missouri is ahead of many states, but behind many states. And you can look at North Carolina, which has been phasing down for 12 years, one of the first states to decide to phase down. And they did it very carefully, very cautiously, perhaps certainly more cautiously than they had to. They could have gone much faster. But I'm glad they took it slow because everybody could watch and see how well it worked. The world didn't end. And then other states said, we can do that too. So what is on the ballot is phasing the income tax to 0. Is this radical? It's radical in the sense of getting to the roots of things, radical that way. But it is also what all the cool kids are doing. And when you get to 0, when a state says we're going to 0, companies some German company wants to have a factory, put it somewhere, we're going to put one in the United States, they get second choice. 50 states, which one? And they're beginning to look and say, which ones are committed to limited government? And the ones that are en route to 0 are the ones that are serious. You don't have to be at 0 before people move in, But they do need to know, since people invest for decades, they need to know that you're going to flat and zero, and so it's not going to bounce back up again. And it's those decisions that have driven a lot of the investment and people moving into states because they knew they could trust this state's not going to go back and reestablish an income tax. They're not going to go from a flat rate up to a graduated rate. So I think it's very exciting that your governor has taken the lead saying we are going to join this parade and we're going to move up towards the front of the parade. And there are a lot of people who've walked up ahead to make sure that there aren't landmines. And that's what going first is brave, but going second or third has some wisdom. And now Missouri moving as other states have done it. Nobody tripped, nobody fell down, nobody got run over by a car, nobody lost an election. All of those things are important, and I think Missouri's effort, Missouri is surrounded by states that are in the process of going to zero. Kansas is going down to 4% flat. They elect a Republican governor. He will go out the rest of the way to zero. Arkansas, the lady governor there, Sarah, thank you. She has several names. Sarah Huckabee Sanders ran on we're going to zero, and she's cut taxes each year. So she's on track to go to zero as well. Nebraska's going down a bit to 4.55, but not yet put themselves on track to zero. But the region's moving in that direction, and your leadership here is going to change the world there. Dundon.
Great. Thank you, Grover. We're going to get into nuts and bolts now with our two representatives, and then Dennis, I have two specific areas I want you to address after that. One point I want to underline, everything Grover said is, of course, completely backed up by all the economic data from whatever source you look at. And as he pointed out, Missouri's not horrible, right? Or none of you might live here any longer, but we could be much better. And so no matter what data set you look at, whether you look at the annual U-Haul index, whether you look at the studies that ATR has done, whether you look at the ALEC Rich States, Poor States document, which comes out every year and is published by some brilliant economic minds, whether you look at the U.S. News and World Report Index, which just came out yesterday, whatever you look at, Missouri's usually in the middle. So we're not terrible, we're not great, we could be doing a lot more. And as Grover just pointed out with this map, the states around us are moving ahead of us. When Missouri started this battle, when I, as Speaker, along with U.S. Senator Eric Schmidt, passed the first income tax cut in Missouri state history, Missouri was leading the charge in the Midwest. But we've gotten a little, fat, lazy, happy, all three, over the last 12 years or so, and we haven't been pursuing this effort as strongly as we should have been. These legislators changed that this year. Bishop, would you explain to us why this version of eliminating the income tax, and give us all of the constitutional parameters that it would set into place if it were to pass next Tuesday?
No, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I don't want to be a burden, but it will be a little bit longer of an answer. Bear with me. So if you want to eliminate income taxes, and we could go on and on about the why is really straightforward. Houses are 4.5 times as expensive as they were 40 years ago. Proportionate income, health care's increased, education's increased. Wages have been stagnant that whole time. When I'm asked why, I think of real people in my life that are facing affordability crises in their own personal homes. I think of my 11 nieces and nephews. I'm one of 9 children, and I look at these young families trying to find a better way forward. And I think this is the single thing that we can do from a state perspective that makes the biggest difference. But if you want to eliminate income taxes, you have 3 main ways, 3 main mechanisms of doing it. Right? You can use revenue growth over time, similar to North Carolina, similar to what we've done actually, and Speaker Jones did 12 years ago with Senate Bill 509. And we've had those triggers reducing our income tax rate from 6% to 4.7%. In that time, it was estimated it would cost $1.95 billion, and it actually generated $2.4 billion. And that's because revenue is not actually connected to the rate. revenue is connected to the underlying economic activity of a state, right? The same can be said for a household or a family or an individual's budget. But the trouble with over time using revenue surpluses is that it takes a pretty long period of time. It takes somewhere in the ballpark of 25 to 30 years, depending on your economic forecasting. So the second way, and a lot of conservatives have brought this up, well, why don't you just cut it out of the budget? Isn't the budget $50 billion? We're talking about $7.8 billion of revenue. Can't you just remove that? And it's a little more complicated. The budget's primarily pass-through dollars from the federal government and constitutionally restricted funds. $14 billion is what we have in terms of discretionary spending. And there's a lot of things that come out of that, but the long and short of it is this. If you eliminated all K-12 education spending, all higher education spending, and closed 20 prisons, all of them, just completely stopped the Department of Corrections, you would still be $800 million short. So cuts aren't really going to cut it, right? I think taxpayers should always hold tax spenders accountable. I think the legislature should always be looking for efficiencies, and I think there are efficiencies to be found. Not $7.8 billion of efficiencies, though. I will say that. So what are we left with? One way takes a good long while. The other way is not realistic. The third way is to use replacement revenue. And that's probably what we're all here to talk about. Because when you talk about replacement revenue, you talk about which taxes are worse than other taxes, right? Which taxes are less tolerable than other taxes. And at the state level, we have two types of taxes, income taxes and sales taxes. I think income taxes are the worst by far. And the reason why is because income taxes, we've talked about this a little bit, they're destructive to the economy. But to put that in maybe terms that we understand, you get less of what you tax. If you tax cigarettes, you get less smoking. You tax alcohol, you get less drinking. Some states have a death tax. They studied it. They got less death. Now, before you go to that state seeking the fountain of youth, they do go to other states to die. But less death in that state, it's because you get less of what you tax. When you tax income, you're taxing productivity, you're taxing ingenuity, creativity, hard work, effort. These are the very cornerstone of economic growth. Because economic growth is when someone decides to work harder, to take a risk, to put themselves out there, to ask for the raise. That's where economic productivity comes from. And they produce more goods and more services. And I don't talk about this all that much, but when you're producing more goods and more services, there's two things that are happening. One, you're creating more jobs, which creates an upward force on wages. And then the other, because you have more goods and services, you're actually pushing down prices. You're getting to go at affordability from both sides, the wage side and the price side. But it's more than that. I think income taxes are bad because it's invasive of a person's privacy. I think income taxes are bad because it's not very transparent. Every single good and service that you consume has an income tax that inflates the price of that good and service. 100%. No exemptions. All essentials. The only everything tax in Missouri is the income tax that increases the cost of everything in Missouri. Sales taxes are on about 30% of the economy. About 70% is frozen in time, and it's all these loopholes that got codified in the Constitution, and that's part of what we try to address here. But it's not just less transparent, it's also less fair. That $7.8 billion, 2.8 million Missourians pay it. There are 43 plus million non-Missourians coming in and out of the state. And they enjoy the goods and services of the state, but they're not contributing, at least not fairly as I see it. Do you think $7.8 billion should be paid by 2.8 million Missourians? Or should $7.8 billion be funded by 46 million plus people who are enjoying the goods and services across the state of Missouri? And so it's not very transparent, it's not very fair, it's invasive of privacy, it's destructive of the economy, and I could go on, but I really don't like income taxes, and sales taxes on every one of those fronts does better, on every single one of those fronts. And I'm happy to talk about that more. So what do we do then? If we've got kind of the why, we've got some of the how, and we know which tax we think is worse than the others and which one's more tolerable, this constitutional amendment tries to use all three of those methods, right? Two of those methods it guarantees. And that's the important part. The first part of the constitutional amendment guarantees that any excess revenue over time has to be used to reduce income tax rates over time. That revenue growth now triggers decreases, that instead of revenue growth going into the coffers of the state, it'll go back into the pockets of Missourians. And by doing that, you create a natural limitation on the spending power of the legislature as well. And so there's your revenue growth and your cuts, those two methods. That section also says that when the income tax is eliminated, the legislature is prohibited from ever reintroducing it. It's probably my favorite line in the whole constitutional amendment. And so that's the guarantee. You vote yes on 5, that's what you can take to the bank. The other part is a constitutional possibility. It says that the legislature may. That if we want to eliminate income taxes faster than 25 to 30 years, right, then we can do so by using replacement revenue. We can do so by having a very guardrailed conversation around sales taxes to eliminate it in more of a 5 to 10 year range. But it's really, really important, and it was very important to me personally, that we had very specific guardrails in place in the legislation to make sure that the legislature did exactly what we were setting them out to do by passing Amendment 5. And those guardrails are these: that any sales tax conversation whatsoever, by expanding the base, by increasing the rate, any of it, it has to be for the purpose of eliminating income tax and reducing local tax rates. It has to be revenue neutral or less. It can't generate new dollars for the government. 3, the offsets have to be in the same piece of legislation, the income tax offsets. And then 4, it has to be enacted within 5 years of the constitutional amendment passing. Those guardrails do exactly what we want a constitutional amendment to do. They create a framework for the legislature to operate within. And we can take that framework and very accurately and mathematically just predict, what does this allow? What does it allow from the legislature? And so I'm happy to talk about that, but I think I answered both of your questions in terms of why and what some of those guardrails are, and maybe we can get to that in later discussion.
All right, we're going to move to Representative Keithley next, and unlike me, I'm a recovering politician and lawyer. Ben is still practicing. He is a lawyer, and he's in office. So he's going to be my counselor here tonight. Ben, let's just go ahead and address one of the questions that always comes up. I think it's almost come up in every single town hall or discussion we've done, and it's one that some folks here are probably wondering about. Talk to us about the Hancock Amendment. Byron Keelan mentioned it earlier, said it was passed in 1980. I think there was a follow-up provision that was related to Hancock, maybe in 1995, 1996. But some folks are wondering, does the Hancock Amendment, is Amendment 5 affected by that in any way? What is the interplay between those? Or does some of the constitutional guardrails that Bishop mentioned protect Hancock and provide even greater protections, as Dr. Aaron Hedlund, who is a Missourian and works at the White House currently, has said?
Thank you. Is this on?
Nope.
All the way?
There
we
we
go.
go.
Perfect. Thanks for that question. And let me just say, first of all, I'd like to preface all of these with saying, if you take one thing away from this, let it be read the bill for yourself. Don't listen to a media's portrayal. Certainly don't listen to a special interest group that has an interest in preserving the income tax and all of their credits and tax breaks. Don't listen to the people who have all the tax loopholes secured in the Constitution and don't want it messed with. Read the bill for yourself. It's a 2.5-page bill of changes, 3 total pages of constitutional guardrail styled language. Read the bill for yourself. I hope you'll take my word. I hope you'll take Representative Davidson's and Grover Norquist and Dennis Ganal's words for it. But if you don't want to do that, that's fine. Just read the bill yourself. Certainly don't go out and take the people who benefit off of the status quo in the current system, because the constitutional framework benefits their industry, benefits them not getting taxed like other businesses get taxed. The question on the Hancock Amendment. Amendment 5 does not suspend the Hancock Amendment. It doesn't eliminate the Hancock Amendment. It doesn't mess with the Hancock Amendment in any way. I think the one thing, there's one provision, and it didn't come from the 1980 Hancock Amendment. It's from the 1996 follow-up that dealt with essentially the rounding error language. With Hancock, it doesn't, when you're doing tax reform, all Hancock says is you go to the voters anytime you're realizing new revenue. You're allowed to do revenue neutral tax reform right now. We don't need to pass Amendment 5. If you wanted to get rid of the income tax and swap it out with all these taxes, if you could prove it was revenue neutral, you would be able to do that right now. Amendment 5 is recognizing that while adjusting some of the rounding problems. And I can tell you right now, these rounding problems aren't really protecting us anyway right now as it is. And I think the gas tax certainly proved that. But what is important in this to understand is why are we adjusting the rounding error, and what are the protections we're getting in return for that in Amendment 5? The rounding error is based on the 1996 adjustments to the Hancock Amendment, anything is considered revenue neutral if in today's dollars it is off by within $96 million. Now, when you're adding a 0.01% onto a tax here or doing an adjustment here, $96 million is a substantial room to maneuver. When you're talking about changing $8 billion worth of revenue, $8 billion is what the income tax brings in. $96 million becomes a rounding error. What does that mean? If you're off by $97 million in year 2 of your 5-year plan, the courts can come in and say, you violated the rounding error provisions, you have to start over, you're giving back all the income tax cuts you've done so far because they brought in too much money and the math was off. Well, isn't that a problem? If we don't have the rounding error protection, what happens if government just keeps collecting more money beyond that? That's why Amendment 5 has its own requirement for revenue neutrality. You don't need the rounding, like we have the rounding error for every other type of tax reform that we have to do. You don't need it in Amendment 5 because Amendment 5 carries its own requirement that the legislation has to be revenue neutral and has to be revenue neutral contained in the same legislation. That is a stronger protection, but it's also a more forgiving protection in the sense that we have a 5-year plan to do this, and if we get it off in one of those years, we return that revenue back in tax cuts the following year, and we don't have to start over from ground zero and mess up our 5-year plan. Nothing about the spirit of Hancock changes in Amendment 5. Any additional revenue, any proposal that is not revenue neutral dealing with the income tax still has to go to the voters. And even dealing with the income tax, if it's not revenue neutral, it still has to go to the voters. If the state government wants to get more tax revenue out of you, it has to go to the voters. Whether or not Amendment 5 passes or not, that is the way it goes. And that rounding error adjustment only happens for the duration of the 5 years. And then the rounding goes right back to where it was after Hancock because income tax is eliminated, ideally. And we are at that point no longer needing to deal with the revenue neutrality requirements because we've already gone to zero. And as Amendment 5 says, we shall remain at zero forever.
Thank you, Ben. Dennis Ganal, remote tax relief now. Dennis, I always feel like I'm picking on you, but you are our resident senior on this. Although you have the energy of a 30-year-old, given how many town halls you've done all across the state. I would like you to address the senior retiree question that we always get, whether we're doing a live town hall, we've done a multitude of telephone town halls, it always comes up. And address it in these regards. So yes, everyone is always, and everyone should be, concerned about their personal situation. And I know you will address that, because there are things in Amendment 5, such as the property tax relief provision, that will benefit all Missourians, whether you're retired, a senior, or not. But secondly, I think people also need to step back and look at Amendment 5 holistically and what it will do for a senior or retiree's children or grandchildren and the future of Missouri.
Right. One of the ways that we were able to sell the senior property tax freeze to voters and the legislators was we said that, you know, keeping seniors in their home was good for the subdivision, was good for the neighborhood, was good for the city. They lived longer, and their families wanted them there. And so when we would take it on petition, we've got it now in 90 counties in Missouri, we've won by no less than 75% in every county. What does that mean? Well, that means young people are voting to keep seniors in their home with the senior property tax freeze. Part of the bill, think about that, right? The highest we've had is 95%, and we've had it in about 5 counties. So that's huge. Well, this is the same story, but it's for the young people. Missouri, as Tim mentioned before, the U-Haul research shows that more people, young people, I just read a statistic the other day that said we've had a decline of like almost 3% of people between the 18 and 26 years old in Missouri. What does that mean? They're leaving Missouri because they don't have the financial opportunities, the career opportunities that they have in other states. I've got a personal story to that. There's three things I have. Number one, I love Missouri as much as anybody in this room. Nobody loves Missouri more than I love Missouri. Number two, I listen. And I listened to seniors, and seniors said, hey, we're being forced out of our homes. And that's when we went, I got Ben, and we went and put that bill together and got that passed. Now what I'm hearing is young people saying, why should I stay in Missouri? My son, case in point, he's 32 years old. He was living in Chicago for 7 years, had a great career going. He got married last summer, and he says, hey, Dad, he says, we're going to move. I said, thank God. Who wants their family raised in Chicago? I said, where are you coming? And I'm thinking proudly St. Louis. He says, well, we're going to Tennessee or Florida. I said, Tennessee or Florida? Why would you go there? And he said, well, they don't have the income tax. I said, that's the only reason? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, hell, I'll fight all year to get you no income tax. So that's why I'm here tonight. But I'm not the only one. Here's a letter from Cindy Jones, Salem, Missouri. Dennis, my family moved here from Maryland 6 years ago. My son has joined us from South Carolina. A Missouri with no income tax presents the opportunity of a brighter future for my two 20-something sons. Cindy Jones. So Missouri families, if we want to keep ourselves intact, if we want to keep our families, at least give them an opportunity to stay with us, then we want to give them a bright future. And this is the beginning, right? This is the first step. So we're really not trying to pass this bill for me. I'm not going to be working much longer. I'm a volunteer. I'm not going to keep. We're passing this for your kids. We're passing this for your grandkids. And so seniors have to look a little. I don't want a senior to be kind of like the greedy geezer syndrome. That's what kind of happens sometimes, right? Well, it's all got to be about me. I'm the senior. Well, that's not the case. What it's got to be about is your family, or there was no reason for you to be here, right? I have always said that the one thing in life that you have to make it meaningful is that if it's not worth something in 100 years, it wasn't worth doing. And that's where we are with this. This is the hallmark moment for Missouri. Missouri can come from the middle or the lower middle of the pack, actually, to become a statewide national leader on Wednesday morning by passing 4 and 5. We can protect ourselves from foreign interest and foreign money, and we can protect our children and our families by passing this. Why do you think Democrats are fighting so hard against this right now? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we've cut them off on local taxes with the property tax freeze. Part of that bill was an exemption for Social Security in income tax, right? Well, now that would be codified into the Constitution, so it can't be removed. You'd have that forever. And last year, the legislators cut $1 billion out of the budget. The governor cut another $500 million out of the budget, right? This is meaningful tax reform. These are people that we can trust. And so that's why they're fighting so hard. They see the writing on the wall. And that if we get Amendment 5 passed, they can see that we will have, as Grover's graph shows you, we'll have control of Missouri for as long as we need, and we'll have our families intact.
Bishop, I think you wanted to add to that on the economic
of seniors.
that can be generated when you eliminate an income tax and move to what you've all been describing, which is a more fair tax consumption-based system.
Yeah, and Dennis already spoke to this some, right? Over the last, I think, 4 years, we've frozen property taxes for seniors. We've eliminated income tax on Social Security, on capital gains, on public pensions. All of our tax reforms have been oriented in that direction, and it's seniors who've known the first benefits of eliminating income tax. It's actually retirees who are coming to us and saying we'd like those same benefits extended to our kids and our grandkids. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about those seniors who we're most concerned about, the paycheck to paycheck retiree, right? I think it's really important to remember that our sales tax code currently falls on just 30% of the economy, and it's mostly things that people are buying at the lower end of the economic spectrum. When you're able to broaden the sales tax base and actually broaden it to include any variety of services or luxury services or whatever else it might be, you're getting into parts of the economy that not everyone consumes, and certainly not the paycheck-to-paycheck person consumes. And by doing so, this has provisions where local rollbacks have to be of the sales tax rate. It has to be of those property taxes. There's a world, depending on which city and which political subdivisions you live in, where you actually have a lower sales tax rate than what you have right now. And I think that's really overlooked and very important, that when you're talking about the paycheck-to-paycheck retiree, you're talking about exempting essentials, which has been commitments made by the legislature, by the governor, and also are constitutionally required in some instances, and also are federally required in other instances. And so you kind of calculate all of those things, and you really do see a direct economic benefit for our seniors. And that's before you even talk about what Dennis was talking about when it comes to their families staying intact and staying here in the state of Missouri.
Ben, I've got some what-if questions for you that also always come up, because everybody wants to know, if Amendment 5 passes, well, what happens next? So I want to ask you about some of those, and then I have another question for Grover, and then we're going to start taking questions. And we got plenty of time for questions. I think we can go till about 8:30 or so, and people have enough questions. So, Ben, I'd like you to talk about what does happen next if Amendment 5, presuming Amendment 5 passes on next Tuesday. My understanding is, and I want to highlight this, if the legislature does nothing, Bishop already hit on this, and I want to underscore it. If Amendment 5 passes and the legislature does nothing, my understanding is that the income tax will continue to ratchet down based on revenue growth using the triggers like we've been doing the last 12 years. So I'd like you to corroborate that. Number two, as we do change, this will be a change of our system of taxation, getting rid of what I call the insidious income tax and moving to a much more appropriate free market-based, consumption-based system. What might that look like? And in the beginning of this discussion 2 months ago, people were saying, oh, the sales tax is going to be 20 or 30%. People have stopped saying that because I think you've all done enough town halls and enough radio interviews to suggest what the sales tax might be based on, once again, all of our surrounding states. And finally, Ben, people are worried about what might be taxed versus not. Talk about the three major exemptions the governor has firmly stated that must be in the bill or who will not sign it. And given the fact that this legislature, as Dennis pointed out, is a tax-cutting legislature, I don't think any of you want to do anything that's going to do nothing other than reduce the overall tax burden for Missourians.
Right. So the only thing that we know for sure happens after Amendment 5 is that the income tax goes away. The question is, how long will that take? Because the one shall in there is the income tax shall be eliminated. The legislature shall pass triggers to bring the income tax down to zero. Now we have to do that based on revenue growth. And Bishop talked about the three levers. How do we get revenue growth? Well, are you going to do it in 5 years or are you going to do it in 30 years? Now you can get there in 25, 30 years just on growth. But if we want to do it sooner, and we don't have to do that, nothing in Amendment 5 requires anything else about our taxing code to change, other than there will be triggers that essentially will look like spending caps on government in order to afford income tax elimination over time, just like we've done to go from 6 to 4.7 from when you were speaker, Tim, that you put in. So the only thing that absolutely happens, the one shall in there, is we shall pass triggers that bring us down to zero. The next question is, how long will that take? And here's where you get into the authorization language. What is the legislature allowed to do? Well, if you need to hit revenue targets, you need to find ways. And Representative Davidson walked through the challenges of how you can't just cut, you can cut some of it, but you can't cut $7.8 billion without essentially shutting down a lot of the things that even us as conservatives would consider necessary spending, at least at some degree and some level. There's not $8 billion worth of waste in our government. So what does that look like? What does the tax rate look like? I've seen numbers, all the people who want you to vote no, the leftist groups and the people who love the income tax system are saying, oh, it's going to be 20%, it's going to be 30%. If we're trying to grow the economy, we can't have 20% tax rates. And that would put us way beyond the revenue neutrality constraints that are in Amendment 5. What does the tax rate actually look like? 4.97% somewhere around there is if you did no exemptions other than the exemptions that you are going to be required to do federally. Governor Keogh has talked about, listed 3 exemptions in his state of the state that he wanted to see, otherwise he wouldn't sign any expansion of the sales tax base to services after Amendment 5. Those 3 were agriculture, healthcare, and realtors. Real estate. Those are all fairly easy promises to make. One, agricultural is business inputs, which are defined differently and wouldn't be subject to a sales tax because it's not an end sale point. Very little of the ag sector that's not currently taxed would be impacted by Amendment 5 because these aren't things that people buy at a final point of sale. They're not selling to a final endpoint customer. They're selling to another business that then is developing that good. Those are things that are currently exempted and would stay exempted because that is not a sales tax. That is not a consumption tax. That would not get caught by any change to Amendment 5. Easy promise to make. Healthcare services. Another easy promise to make because almost half of all healthcare spending in Missouri right now, no matter what we do with Amendment 5, is always going to remain exempt from any kind of consumption tax because it's done under Medicare, Medicaid, or some other federal kind of spending program, federal healthcare program that isn't allowed to be taxed because of federal law. What we do in the Missouri Constitution doesn't change that, which means half of the healthcare spending is never going to be eligible to pass on the or to tax on the other side of Amendment 5 anyway. Real estate, we are not doing anything with Section 25 of the Missouri Constitution, which currently right now exempts home sales. So no sales tax, even after Amendment 5. Section 25 doesn't change. Home sales still cannot be subject to sales taxation on the other side of Amendment 5. So Governor Keogh said he would not sign a bill that didn't have those three provisions. And quite honestly, those are 3 things, for the most part, that would not be subject to taxation anyway under Amendment 5, with some things around the margins there that then would increase it. So what does the number go to when you factor in those exemptions that we probably have to do anyway, and then don't start giving out? I'm a conservative. Part of what I base this on is it fair to give some industries a break? Right now, lawyers don't pay sales taxes, but someone selling shirts does. If you want to buy socks, you pay sales tax. If you want to hire a CPA or a lawyer, you don't pay sales taxes on. Is that fair? Should we be giving certain industries certain breaks and picking winners and losers? Or as conservatives, do we think everyone should be treated the same under our tax code? I opt for the latter, and that's part of why. If we're missing 70% of our economic activity, and it's growing, because we are moving more towards a services-based economy every single year in Missouri. If we are missing 70%, there is a lot of missed room there, and that's creating a very inefficient tax system that is creating losers in the good system, the people who are currently, the businesses who are currently getting caught by the sales tax, and not the other way around. So 4.97%, that is not an additional 4.97% on top of what we already do. The current Missouri state sales tax is 4.225. We're not talking about adding another 4. We are saying going from 4.225 to 4.97% is the end amount, is what you would get. Now, if we want to go back and undo the problem we're trying to solve with Amendment 5, which is we have too many loopholes constitutionally codified right now, we need to get rid of those. If you want to then turn around and just trade them out for statutory codifications, which to me shouldn't be the goal. But if we did that, that number is going to go up, the rate would go up, or it's going to take longer for us to get there than the 5 years the governor has laid out as his plan. The idea is to land somewhere around that number. So isn't that an increase? 4.225 to 4.97, is there a little bit of increase? Sure, at the state level. But you all know you don't pay 4.225%. You pay closer to 10%, 9%, 11% if you're shopping in Chesterfield Valley. Well, my sales taxes are higher than 4.225. It's because of the local side. You pay roughly 4%, 4.225, roughly 4% to the state of Missouri, and then the rest of it is being paid to local. Well, let me ask you this. Do you care if you pay 4% to the state and 6% to the local versus 5% to the state and 5% to the local? You care what your end tax rate is. I certainly do. If it stays 10%, it stays 10%, and I'm not going to, it doesn't matter which end of the equation it goes to. Well, how do we keep it at that 10%? Well, Representative Davidson touched on this. It's not only the state government that's required to be revenue neutral. The local governments will realize expanded base revenue too from getting taxes on. They're missing out on 70% of the economy, just like the state government is. When you open up all those businesses to the local, they're getting new revenue too. So what does revenue neutrality look like for a city or for a county? They don't charge income tax, with two egregious examples that have the city earnings tax in Kansas City and St. Louis. But for most cities and counties, they don't have an income tax. How do they be revenue neutral? Well, Amendment 5 addresses this expressly in the language. They have to cut their personal property tax rates. They have to cut their real property tax rates. And they have to cut their sales tax rates in order to make sure they're not getting windfall revenue off of Amendment 5. Which means for a lot of these places, when they bring down their sale, they're having to bring down their sales tax rate to accommodate for the additional revenue at the same time the state is going up. The end result is for the overwhelming parts of Missouri, for pretty much all of Missouri, your sales tax rate, your effective sales tax rate, not the state rate, not the local rate, what you actually pay at the point of sale stays the same. In some places, depending on how much of their revenue is property tax based for sales tax rate, some places would actually see an overall sales tax reduction because they have to bring their rates down so much to compensate for the additional 70% of services that weren't taxed before that they are now receiving revenue on. It's not just the state that can't realize new revenue off of this. The local governments have the same requirement, and the end result is while the state goes up from 4.225 to somewhere closer to 5%, the local governments come down at the same time, and the end result is the overall sales tax rate stays the same.
Grover, one more question for you, and then we're going to open up questions to the audience.
That's great.
Grover, two things. Some people may be wondering, well, this all sounds like magic. It sounds too good to be true. I have three numbers that I know you are aware of that come from the state of Tennessee. I just looked these up to make sure I was correct on these. As you mentioned, as everybody knows, Tennessee has a zero income tax, and they also eliminated a multitude of other taxes that were existent in Tennessee that they never used to like to talk about, that were on different aspects of dividend and interest income. So they're a true zero now. Their state sales tax rate is 7%, and Representative Keithley just talked about the fact that Missouri will absolutely work to be far below that. So 7%, so 0, 7. The third number, Tennessee also happens to have one of the lowest property taxes in the country at around 2.5%. So I'd like you to talk about how Tennessee is doing. I'll just put one fact in here. Missouri used to have a higher population than Tennessee. Tennessee now has 1 million more residents than Missouri. Higher GDP growth and a larger budget. Secondly, Grover, the other thing you always talk about is what are people getting for their taxes versus their population? And you use the example of New York versus Florida. Their populations versus their services. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, if people worry, oh my goodness, if we're not spending as much money as everybody else, are we losing services? Florida is now a larger state than New York in population by about 2 to 3 million more. When I was growing up, they had cows in Florida, and it was a big cattle place. Now they got people there, and so they have more people in Florida. Florida state government spends half as much as the New York State budget. 230 billion New York, 115 billion in Florida. How do they do that? Look, how do they have no income tax? They spend $115 billion less. Does that mean they have no roads? No, they have roads. They've got education better than New York. The place all blows down every 3.5 weeks. And they put it back together again. So they do all the things that you would want a government to do and more. They've actually reduced spending in Florida, state spending, over the last 4 years of Governor DeSantis' governorship. So actual real dollars less. If people know that they're not getting income taxes thrown in front of them, what drives a lot of the spending is income taxes raise revenue faster than other taxes for the government. And then the money all shows up and they go, well, I guess we spend to what came in. And that's not the way to budget. not other people's money. It's not your money. It's other people's money. You budget your own money at home that way, but you're not allowed to budget other people's money that way. It is, and Tennessee has had tremendous advantages. A lot of businesses moving in, a lot of people moving in, million people more, and creating jobs and opportunities. And I think the most important thing sometimes is people don't leave Tennessee. And a lot of people's kids and grandkids leave cities. I just talked to a woman who's leaving Missouri, actually, sorry. Missouri going to Texas. And it's right on the border, I forgot where it was, to follow kids, because that's where the kids and grandkids are. And so getting Missouri on the path, the same path that Tennessee and other states have taken, solves a lot of those challenges. And it really is, and money isn't washing up. One of the things that kills California is they have a lot of billionaires over there who have capital gains taxes, and when they, the companies they started there, and then they sell the capital gains, and all this money shows up, and the government of California acts as if, well, I guess it's going to happen every year, won't it? And so they put permanent spending money on things that were one-time events, and now they have to raise all the other taxes to catch up with what they did. Getting to sales tax, not an income tax, doesn't give you those spikes and doesn't drive up spending on a permanent basis. Keeping the income tax away solves a lot of those problems, and one finds over time you just don't need as many people in government, you don't need as much spending in government, and it becomes significantly easier to slow the growth of government to where in Florida it's shrinking.
Okay, that was fairly comprehensive. Thank you. You guys can clap for them. That was pretty. I tried to get right to the point on many of the same questions we've heard all across the state this summer. But you may all have more, so let's take questions. Sir, and if you could state it loudly and then I'll repeat it. Oh, we've got, in case you're wondering who these two weirdos are with all the gadgets and the equipment, this is Oscar and James with the Show Me Sentinel. They've been following us around and helping us record and live streams, because this will be posted on the Show Me Sentinel's Facebook page, so you can share this with your friends if you thought this was wonderful tonight, and tell people over the next week to check this out. So thank you, Oscar and James, for being here. Go ahead.
Yeah, you talked about individual income taxes, but a bigger effect on employment is business taxes. You didn't mention that at all. I don't even know what business taxes are.
Right. The question is about Missouri's corporate tax rate, business taxes. Bishop, you want to take a stab at that? Or
Yeah, our corporate income tax rate is 4% currently in Missouri. And this doesn't address corporate income tax. It does address the bigger piece, which is personal or individual income tax, as you put it. And of course, that includes pass-through entities and pass-through income of LLCs and partnerships and things like that. Our corporate income tax is for our S-corps particularly. And I think that businesses mostly, you look at those states without individual income taxes. Some of them do have corporate income taxes. Businesses are mostly going where they know they can find good labor, and that good labor is going to where they can keep more money in their pocket. But don't tempt me with a good time. I'm not a fan of any type of taxes, especially any taxes on productivity. But Amendment 5 is specifically trying to address the problem of individual income taxes.
But when states are dealing with the income tax personal income tax in North Carolina for 12 years, they were phasing it down, and they looked back and said, what's the little thing in the back compared to the property income tax? And they said, oh, that's the corporate income tax. And they just said, okay, in the next 4 years it disappears, and they've cut it 25%, and it disappears completely in 2 years. So they decided to get rid of it because they were growing enough. They said, well, we can afford to get rid of it because we see how we're doing. When they moved the income tax down in Iowa, they dropped, at the same time they dropped the individual rate from 8.6 trigger down to 3.8. They took the corporate rate from 12 to 7. So once you're going and you feel somewhat comfortable, a number of the states have reached back and said, we could take that corporate rate down too.
And I know Missouri's cut the corporate income tax rate. I think we're one of the lowest 5 in the country.
Of the ones that charge.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Sir, yes.
Yeah, on the subject of the getting rid of the income tax, if they're able to get the business act done happen, will that actually allow businesses to actually lower the prices of their goods?
Okay. How does lowering the income tax in the state affect the overall price of goods? I think one of you talked about that briefly, but
I did, yeah.
let's highlight or add to that. Ben, Keith, Ben?
Sure. Yeah. So the idea is, I mean, the best way to lower prices is the market doing it through real market means, not government coming up with a policy that tends to make problems worse. What eliminating the income tax does is it essentially makes us open to business for more investment, for more business opportunities, for more people to come in, and with that brings more competition for the businesses are there. That naturally brings down prices through natural market economics. But the other thing it does is we've made the cost of labor a little cheaper. Every employee in every business in Missouri has instantly gotten a 4.7% raise. Wages actually, White House analysis shows that wages will actually go up by even a little bit more than that because of the additional income coming in and them having to compete with more workers who want to be in Missouri. That drives wages up even further beyond just the sheer automatic raise of not having an income tax bill at the end of the year does. But making that labor a little cheaper is another way. The economic activity, more businesses coming in. All of that has the effect of using natural market principles to drive down costs. The other thing is, and I guess it's right, do you really think that businesses will start lowering their costs? Well, if you want to keep your customer base with more businesses coming in and having to compete and chasing the same customers, some business owners will make that decision. I'll tell you what will absolutely happen if they don't lower the prices right away. They're going to think twice before they raise the price the next time through. Anyone who's lived through the last 5 or 6 years of what we've been through since COVID and seen the price gouging and the prices increasing and the inflation that's happened knows that it's not the lack of price decreases that's getting us, it's how fast they're raising on us. Well, having a growing economy and having a competitive economy, most of all, is what not only encourages businesses to lower their prices, but the businesses who are already here, it makes everyone think twice before they raise it. Can I afford to raise my prices next year and keep my same customers coming back?
Other questions? Yes, sir, right here, the red.
There was some talk earlier, and I've heard this at other events, of taxing certain 1099 services. Would that apply to businesses, or would those be considered inputs to businesses' output where they wouldn't be taxed? And I guess the other question is, how do other states currently handle that if they, to the extent they cover 1099 services?
So for our guys recording, the question was taxation involving 1099 services. How is that treated? Where's the end user on those? You sort of you talked about that, so maybe you need some more detail.
Yeah, and when he's talking about 1099 services, he's talking about individual contractors or contracted labor. And really, it comes down to that final point of consumption or that final point of sale. So when most people think of contractors, they're thinking of maybe building a house, and then you've got folks come in and do the sheetrock, other folks do the framing, other folks do the electrical work or the this work or the roofing or whatever it might be, right? All of those things that I just described are what you just said. It's a business input. It is a cost of producing, not a cost of consuming. And so those aren't calculated whatsoever in any of our numbers because we're only dealing with a consumption tax, only dealing with final points of consumption. If we did what you described, it wouldn't be allowed by Amendment 5 because it's called a value-added tax. It's something entirely different and separate from that. As far as your other question, which is how do other states do it, there are currently 0 states that have value-added taxes, and thank goodness because they're really terrible forms of taxation. They're very popular in Europe, and fortunately they haven't made their way across the pond. But this constitutional amendment doesn't allow them.
Is the presumption, though, that a service provided to a business is an input to some output it's selling? Like, say, an accountant does hourly work on a 1099 basis for a firm that builds houses, would the business pay sales tax on those services?
That's not a final point of consumption. No, that's not calculated as a final point of consumption. And our data set, if you want to use the data set, it's from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It's their personal consumption expenditures index that they do every year for Missouri. And you can look at, it's 17 categories, if I'm remembering, and 300 subcategories of spending. And that's how you construct your sales tax base. But it only counts final points of consumption.
Question from the cheap seats back here.
Yeah, I got two quick questions. One, I know there's been some talk about how Missouri's tax code's outdated. And can you just confirm or clarify what you have to make in Missouri to get taxed in the top three? And then also, I think it's ridiculous that we have to pay property taxes on things we already bought. And I know I've seen some things on this, including property tax. Can you talk about how this also addresses property tax?
So the antiquity of Missouri's current tax code, when was the last time it was reviewed, overhauled, modernized? And then the second part was how and in what ways does Amendment 5, if passed, affect property taxes and the worst of all, personal property taxes? Are they affected?
Yeah, so it's antiquated. Our taxing system is really antiquated in a lot of ways. Right now, $9,200, that's now the top bracket of income taxes. You just have to make $9,200. Anything over $9,200 is now taxed at that top rate of 4.7%. If you had adjusted that when it was passed, it would be like $100,000 right now. And so when we talk about the top rate or the top bracket, it's sort of silly in Missouri because everyone falls into the top bracket in Missouri. It's also antiquated in that our sales tax code is frozen in time. Ben had mentioned this earlier. Our economy is evolving. It's moving to a service-based economy. You know, you've seen ads talk about AI services. Well, AI services didn't exist when our sales tax code was frozen in time back in 2015. And what that means is that they're exempt from any taxes. And that's what we mean when we talk about modernizing that sales tax code. And it's what allows us to eliminate the income tax faster. And it's what allows us to not just eliminate the income tax, but to reduce local tax rates like sales taxes and like property taxes. Which brings me to the next point. Property taxes, right? Those are things that are locally assessed, locally collected, locally spent. It makes it really hard for the legislature, I'll be honest. And if you look at all the bills that the legislature has proposed, they have all been caps on assessment. They've been caps on adjustments. They've been freezes. This is the only piece of legislation that created a path to reducing property taxes. I mean, that's revolutionary. I don't think that's happened in 50 years. I think this is the most substantive property tax reform that we have had since Hancock Amendment, frankly. And so it's always something that's very interesting to me because they say, well, why didn't you get this done or this done on property taxes? The bills that we're talking about only froze property taxes at best or maybe capped assessment rates. What we're talking about now is a very clear path forward to actually reduce property tax rates, which hasn't been done in Missouri.
Ben, you had a property tax reform bill, and it was killed by one of our illustrious state senators on the last day of session.
Yes.
So this is the only, Amendment 5 is it, at least for the next year.
Right. This is a real thing you can do on the ballot next week. It is expressly hardwired in the language. You can look at the bill. It requires local governments to reduce their personal and real property tax rates in the bill because they have to be revenue neutral like the state does. The other thing I'd point out just to add on to that is I think 1917 is when we put the current income tax into place. It's over 100 years old. 100 years ago, labor didn't move across state lines as easily as it does now. It's real easy now. 100 years ago, almost the entirety of the country, it was fine to tax goods, and we didn't really have a thought of services. There was no AI or data or computer or internet sales, and labor did not move. Income tax was as harmful then as it is now, but you could get away with it because the people did not punish you. They couldn't punish you with their feet. Tennessee, Florida, and even states like New Hampshire, all the green states up here are proving that businesses are making decisions that punish states with income tax. And as we see more of these states go from gray or yellow to striped, and then from striped to green, the pressure becomes very, very real. people will punish Missouri for having an antiquated income tax code if we don't do something about it, if we decide we're going to keep the same policy in place that we've had for over 100 years.
Yes.
Yep. Thanks. In looking at this map last time I had seen it, the one big takeaway I had was that here within the next decade, if we don't do anything, we'll be completely surrounded by states with either 4% or significantly less, other than Illinois to our east. And as you mentioned, Ben, the interstate competition is real. And Iowa, Nebraska, maybe even, well, maybe not Kansas, but definitely Oklahoma, Kentucky, Tennessee, and probably by that point in time, Arkansas will bleed us dry. My other question, well, that's a comment. My real question was, you briefly touched on the myriad of tax credits and exemptions, which eliminating the income tax would also, by necessity, also eliminate or basically raise everybody's credits effectively to 100%. What is the total number of special interest credits against the income tax code right now, and do you happen to have a dollar figure for how many of those dollars are exempted on behalf of some at the ultimate expense of others?
Okay, hang on one second. Let's address that second. Grover, would you first answer the first? It was a comment, but it's also kind of a question in there. The concept of income migration is a very real thing, isn't it?
People move and they take their money with them, yes. Missouri's surrounded. Kansas is about to elect a governor who's committed to taking theirs not just to 4%, which is the present law, it's going to 4%, but to take it to 0. Nebraska, the governor's, it goes down to 4.55, but they're actually looking to go back to phasing down. And our friends in Arkansas are really on track to go to 0 there. So all around you, in Alabama, the one that doesn't look like it's moving, the next governor of Alabama told me his top priority was taking Alabama to 0.
And Bishop and Ben, can you give us a sense of how many and the relative value of the exemptions, carve-outs, and our tax credit system as well?
Well, I did talk about the picking winners and losers, which our sales tax system is doing absolutely when you say this industry is going to pay nothing and this industry is going to pay the full brunt of it. But we also do it, the income tax itself is a system of picking winners and losers. We do that through the tax credit system. When we want to influence behavior, again, something as Republicans that we don't like, we don't think government ought to be using tax code or directing us and trying to engineer behavior in the economy or elsewhere. But that's exactly what the income tax encourages government to do. And through doling out different tax credits in different schemes and different breaks, it allows government to use the personal income tax, to use income taxes as a way for manipulating you into doing this, encouraging this kind of behavior. You know, we want people to go more into this industry, so this one gets a credit. So now the current credits, I think it was $1 billion, and about 2/3 of that is done through the corporate, 1/3 of that. So there are significant amounts of money that we would save just on eliminating the tax credits that exist beyond just what we're doing to create a fair system across the sales tax base if we expanded the sales tax base. But because we are that's an authorization. We may not actually do that. We're allowed to do that if we want to do it faster. But what we do know we're doing is eliminating the personal income tax when we pass Amendment 5. And with that, we lose a sizable chunk of all the tax credit schemes that are thumbing on the scale of our economy and influencing behavior overall, giving tax breaks to these people and not to these people.
Other questions? Gentleman in the back there.
Just a quick question. I find it sort of suspicious of its absence, and that is, if Amendment 5 were to pass, does that give you the ability to increase taxes and other taxes on gambling, gaming machines, and sports betting? And just as a side note on that, if anybody would like to take a guess how much my 16-year-old son bet on sports betting in the last couple of weeks, it's greater than $500. And I don't think there's a high school kid that's any different than him. So So I just wonder, is gambling, sports betting, are you able to go after that?
See, and this is
And let's expand that to marijuana as well, which has also come up in some.
Yeah, it's-
How does
it's
this
all-
affect- How
it's-
does this affect the sin taxes?
It's a similar answer, and so this allows the consumption tax, the sales taxes. The problem is, and a lot of people ask the question, and that why not just put? So I said 4.97% as a sales tax rate if we just treat everyone as fair as we possibly can while adhering to the federal exemptions that we're required to do and the remaining constitutional ones. 4.97%. Why don't we just put that in the Constitution? And it's because we shouldn't be doing specific rates in the Constitution itself. That is not the place to make decisions where we can't change it from year to year. If there's a problem, we can't tinker with it. And to answer your question, the reason I'm going around your question like this is because the answer to your question is no. Things like marijuana, things like sports gambling, and a lot of the casino taxes we can't address. And the reason is because the special interests bought those provisions in the Constitution. And when they did 42-page constitutional amendment language, like in the case of marijuana and online sports gambling last year, they not only gave themselves the right to do it, they not only gave themselves the monopoly, but they also hardwired in our Constitution the specific tax rate, the licensing requirements, and the tax deductions that they're allowed to take in the case of the online sports gambling world. We can't address those. Part of the reason Amendment 5 allows us to at least start fighting back towards some of these loopholes. The point of Amendment, we want to eliminate the income tax. But the other really powerful thing that we're just not talking enough about is we have to get away from this idea that it is acceptable to do specific tax coding inside of our Constitution. Amendment 5 also solves that problem. Now, I wish we could solve it for gambling. I wish we could solve it for marijuana. The problem is, and I would love to do that, they're not all in Article 10. The Hancock Amendment, and again, you know the Hancock Amendment is alive and well. We're respecting it in this because the Hancock Amendment says we can only amend one article at a time. Well, if we want to eliminate the income tax, the best place to do that is Article 10. All these other ones are buying their own sections because they know it's harder to go after them. It's another reason why we should pass Amendment 4 also. But there's the answer. I wish we could. We can't, though, but we're trying to solve that problem. We're solving as much of it as we can in Amendment 5.
But
Yeah, that's a great tie. That's a great tie into 4. 4 is our Constitution's not only become the playground for the left-wing billionaires, it's become the playground for the special interests of Missouri as well. They just bypass the legislature and put their things in the legislature. And wherever all of you are on marijuana, I want you to know that most of the folks in the marijuana business now hate the fact that marijuana was put in our Constitution because of that very fact Ben just mentioned. You put something in the Constitution, it's immutable. It's just frozen in time. There have been a ton of problems that have come out of that recreational marijuana provision for the industry. Forget about what people think about it and society and all that. The industry is having problems with its own amendment now because it stupidly shoved it 48 pages into the Constitution. So they're actually asking legislators to fix their problem they created. So it's like, well, you guys did this, so you're gonna have to raise another $20 million and do another ballot initiative, I guess, if you want to fix all these issues you created.
And to address a little bit of a myth that I have heard on marijuana in particular, I've heard it online or seen it places that says, oh, this exempts marijuana from any sales tax. And that's not true. I mean, what they're pointing to is the very last page at the very end where it talks about with the exception of the rate imposed under Article 14 of this Constitution. And that's there, but that's a clause in a whole sentence, which is in a subdivision. What is it accepting it from? It's accepting it from rollbacks. It's saying that it can't be reduced in its rate. It's not saying that this doesn't apply to it. And so I've seen a lot of misinformation around that subdivision in particular. And I just encourage you, to Ben's point, if you're going to read the legislation, really make sure to read the context of the legislation and the other provisions as it references those other parts of the Constitution.
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions. Sir, you in the back with the tie. You had your hand up a couple times.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, someone had briefly mentioned the earnings tax in the city of St. Louis. I was wondering if Amendment 5 passes, what would that do to the earnings tax?
Great question. How does Amendment 5 address the St. Louis and Kansas City earnings tax? the additional tax on top of all the other taxes.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about property taxes and sales taxes. In the instance of St. Louis and Kansas City, those local rollbacks include earnings taxes as well. And so that's its effect on those earnings taxes, is that as that local political subdivision receives a windfall, they have to use that rollback on income taxes, in their instance, earnings taxes, sales taxes, and property taxes.
Is it prioritized?
It says in a manner as prescribed by the General Assembly, is what it says.
Okay, how many more questions do we have? How many more total? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm going to have each of you ask your question, okay? And then we'll have the panel, whoever feels they want to tackle them, so guys, listen carefully.
Okay.
So we got four hands up. Okay, was there somebody over here? Yes. Ma'am, yes, go right ahead.
So, I think I've heard a lot of helpful information on the why in like the big picture. But the conversations I keep having with people are, what about gas? What about groceries? What's going to happen there? Like the very specifics. I know why they're not in because it's a constitutional amendment. But what can you tell us about something simple like gas and groceries? And is there some frequently asked question place to go to get an idea?
Okay, I've got some resources for you. Okay, so what's going to be taxed? Okay, was there somebody else in the back over here? Start with the hat. Yes.
Yeah, two quick questions. I'm reading the bill, but what's the stipulation about this 5 years? Does this mean you have 5 years to accomplish this? And then it's frozen or what in, section 26 here of your bill? And then my second question is, what happens if you anticipated if we hit a bad recession or depression, since we're going to consumption taxes? What that would affect the revenue coming into Missouri?
Yeah.
Okay. I wrote some stuff down there. Lady in the back, all the way in the back.
One question I had was, is there a way to hold these local governments accountable? If they're supposed to be, if they get more revenue rolling back, I don't necessarily trust the local governments. So I was curious if there's a way to hold them accountable. And then I would also like to hear a little more about the replacement revenue and how that doesn't make it less affordable for people if they're going to pay more tax on goods and services, or drive business away.
Okay. Okay. I think we got it. Ma'am, up front. We're running out of time. We have to be out of this room by 9. Yes.
Mine's along the line of what she was asking about the specifics of being taxed, but on services, you said some things are taxed and some things aren't. Does that mean you're saying goods are taxed but labor is not? And like, what services then would be taxed when you go to your dealership? Parts are taxed but services not. So that service would be, but other services like your, I don't know, nursery guy that comes out and plants a tree, that would not be taxed. I mean, can you be more specific on what services would be taxed, and would it be at the same rate as product as goods?
Okay, so we're going to get through all 4 of these, and then we're going to be finished with the formal part of our program. So we're then going to have all of the candidates, elected officials, anyone who's running for office or running for re-election. If you'd like to sign the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, we'll take a photo of you with Grover up front. And then if we have time left still in the room, nobody's running away. Any of you that want to ask additional questions, you can ask it of any of these folks. And we have other people in the room as well that will come up front who have been working on this all year as well. All right, so we had 2 questions about the items that will be taxed. We had a question about the 5-year provision.
Yeah.
What happens if we hit a recession or a bad year? And how do we hold local governments accountable? Who wants to go first?
So real quick, you hold local governments accountable because it's constitutional, 1. But then 2, they collect those revenues. They don't actually collect them. It goes straight to the Department of Revenue. So all you have to do is keep that money at the Department of Revenue and say we're not remitting it back until you roll back your rate, right? So that's 1. When it comes to revenues during a recession, income tax revenues are far more volatile by recessions than consumption tax revenues. And so if we're talking about a recession, we've got to talk about it in the context of the new system that we're discussing with consumption taxes, but we also have to talk about it comparing it to the current system. And right now, income tax revenues swing up and down, far more volatile, far more willy-nilly than it comes to consumption taxes. As far as the 5-year window, that's 5 years for enactment of such legislation, not the completion of that legislation. And the reason that it's a 5-year window is so that it fell within the broad terms of those who are making laws today. It ensures that there are those who are in the legislature will still be in the legislature, and it also ensures that we fall within the bounds of Governor Kehoe's term limitedness.
So you can raise it after 5 years?
No, you can't.
Sales tax?
No, any sales tax has to be done within that 5-year window, one, enacted within that 5-year window, one, and then has to have in the same piece of legislation offsets in the income tax. So,
Ben, you want to tackle goods, services, the differences, things that may or may not be taxed?
Yeah, so first off, the gas and groceries. Example one, groceries are taxed right now. They're subject to state sales tax right now. And low, to kind of address some of the income disparity thing, lower income people buy goods. They don't really buy services as much. They don't buy lawyers. They don't buy they don't buy CPAs accounts, but they do buy groceries. They do buy clothes. And so this is a different kind. We're not talking about increasing on goods, and really the bulk of the new money is coming from the services that aren't taxed. And the idea would be tax everything equally. Don't pick winners and losers. Treat industries differently. So the nursery guy who plants the tree, who by the way is paying income tax already. I mean, you have embedded taxation. You're paying some of that already when he has to turn around and pay his April tax bill. But he wouldn't have that anymore. Instead, he would have a transparent services tax. Just like in the same way you go to the grocery store, which is currently taxed. Gas right now has an excise tax. We aren't allowed to do a sales tax. Legally, they are considered different things. We don't have sales tax on gas. Amendment 5 does not change anything that's currently in statute. Right now, gas is exempted statutorily from a sales tax. And so that would stay in place. Some of the things that are taxed still have statutes. Here is what I would explain to you, or here's what I would say is, it's okay for us to have conversations. There may be some things, like healthcare, for example. As Governor Kehoe pointed out, there's a lot of good reasons why certain types of industries maybe do deserve to be treated differently under the tax code. But having broad constitutional language that stops us from ever having the debate year after year after year is the wrong way to approach it. The better way to do it is if an industry wants to be treated differently in the tax code, they should have to entertain, they should be subject to defending that every year because the economy changes, the realities change, and we shouldn't be locked in. The Missourians tomorrow should not be dealing with what Missourians from yesterday or 20 years ago or 5 years ago put in place in the Constitution and codified. We should be having these discussions at a statutory level rather than giving industry protectionism constitutionally codified like we are now.
Great. Harrison, did you have something?
Yeah, I have one quick question.
We get 'em
I'm from Kansas City. There's a lot of people that all have a lot of conversations about property tax issues. Obviously, there's a possibility to reduce property taxes. I'd be curious that with how Amendment 5 is structured, with them potentially broadening the sales tax base, couldn't that potentially allow, even in years and decades in the future, for local political subdivisions to even lower property taxes even more, with them bringing in more revenue with economic growth?
I think we've addressed that, but
Yes.
want to highlight that? Yes, right?
yeah, I mean, it could. I don't have the most faith in local governments, I'll be honest. But, it certainly could. And hopefully people will hold their local governments accountable as much as they hold their state legislature accountable and demand that they lower their rates as they receive new revenues.
Okay, 3 quick announcements. If you did not get enough information tonight, we are going to have 3 more telephone town halls. You can sit at home in your pajamas and listen to more of this exciting talk about tax policy. 3 more telephone town halls. And if you'd like to listen in or like to, maybe make sure you understood something, go to AFP Missouri. I always screw this up. Is it .com or .org? .com. AFPmissouri.com. All the telephone town halls that we did are on there. You can listen to the replays. And we have 3 more scheduled. There's one tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and next Monday, we're running through the tape here. Tomorrow, we are going to have one of my very good old friends, whose son is here tonight, actually. My good friend, Congressman Dr. Bob Onder, is going to be joining us tomorrow. Bobby, thanks for being here tonight. Good to see you. The Congressman is going to be joined by Dr. Aaron Hedlund, right? For those of you who don't know Aaron Hedlund, he's a PhD in economics. He's a Missourian. He lives in mid-Missouri. He is on his second tour of duty at the White House Council of Economic Advisors. He's one of the smartest eggheads I've ever met. And he is a huge proponent he's a volunteer because he's working for the federal government. Totally, he has donated hundreds of hours of his time this summer because he truly believes in this, and he was one of the people who helped put Amendment 5 together. And Camille, who's our third person tomorrow? Representative Davidson. I should have known that. Thursday, we've got Attorney General Catherine Hanaway and Representative Davidson. And we have a third person. Gary Hollis on Thursday. And then Monday, you will hear once again from Governor Mike Kehoe, Representative Bishop Davidson, and Ben Keithley. So we're finishing with the 18th. So that's, if you need more information, or more importantly, if we've convinced you tonight, wonderful, share it with your friends. AFPmissouri.com. AFPmissouri.com. 3 more telephone town halls. I know we have we have several current elected officials in the room, some state reps and such. Would you all raise your hands? So, how about formers too? We got some formers. There we go. Yeah. Carolyn came all the way over from Kansas City, right? Your last name I always screw up. Is it Catan? Caton. Carolyn Caton, Kansas City. Dan Stacy also came over from the Kansas City region. Thank you both. And who did I miss? I saw John. John here? John Simmons, a good doctor. Yes. From Franklin County. So those are our current or former electeds, and I want to thank you all for being here. Finally, we're not signing the pledge or re-signing the pledge as some kind of political stunt tonight. It's a very important document, and it's important because of its simplicity. It says, I, state your name, will not raise taxes, especially going to sex. Grover created this 40 years ago, and we're actually celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Taxpayer Protection Pledge this December. If you want to party with us in Washington, D.C., at the Building Museum. It's a beautiful facility. And the pledge has been taken by everyone from sitting presidents to dog catchers to everywhere in between. And it is a pledge not to raise your taxes. So as we're having this very important discussion about a major historic change that I believe will grow Missouri, all of the legislators who plan to be in Jefferson City next year to implement Amendment 5 are going to once again renew their pledge to all of you tonight and to the rest of Missouri that they're not going to raise taxes. They will abide by the constitutional mandate of Amendment 5 of revenue neutrality or better. And I think these fellas, especially up here, and John Simmons and Carolyn, they want to do better than revenue neutrality. And I think Amendment 5 allows that. I want to close with Dennis. He's one of the reasons we're all here tonight. Several years ago, Dennis came out of retirement and said, I want to help seniors, and I want to freeze their property taxes, which was a huge outcry, not only in Missouri, but across the country. And he did it. And then he looked at me after it was done and said, well, what are we going to do next? And I said, well, Dennis, I think we need to finally go after that income tax. And he said, well, let's do it. And Dennis was adamant that I start working on that and that we get Grover involved. Bishop had been working on this for years. Ben, I knew, was chomping at the bit. And so, Dennis, I want to give you the closing opportunity here, and then we're going to have the legislators come up, and then we've got the room for a while, so if you want to then talk to folks, if you have questions you need to have expanded upon or it didn't get asked, you can come up and talk to me as well. Dennis, I want to finish with you.
Thank you. All I wanted to say is this. My son did move back to St. Louis, and they're expecting their grandchild in October. So that's how you grow Missouri. You grow it one person at a time, right? And that's what we can all be working for. So what you need to do tonight is you need to go home, commit yourself, especially if you're young, get on the social media, start announcing it to your friends, start reaching out because you're going to be most affected. The seniors need to go out and tell their groups and whoever they are, get their voices heard, and most of all, get to the ballot box on Tuesday or anytime between now and Tuesday and vote for Amendments 4 and Amendment 5 if you want a strong plan forward for Missouri. Because the other people have no plan. Have you noticed that? There's no plan. They're just screaming about why this is a bad idea. So that's what you've got to do. That's the close tonight. You got to get out. You got to vote. You got to get your families to support this because this is Missouri's future.
Finally, if those of you are wondering, this has been a massive group effort. And I do want to thank the Missouri Republican Party. You know, the party and the movement conservatives and the grassroots are not always on the same page. And I've had plenty of battles with the party over my 2+ decades of working in Missouri politics and public policy. But the party has done yeoman's work as well this year. Peter Kinder, our chairman, Miles Ross, the executive director, Chandler Haynes, the political director, and the folks representing you. FreedomPrincipleMo.org. FreedomPrincipleMo.org. MoTaxReliefNow.org. Lots of specific information on both Amendments 4 and 5. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for participating in this